Welcome to Wickless Night. There is something different about a night with no light at all, no candle burning, no lamp in the corner, just darkness, silence, and the feeling that something may be closer than it should be. Tonight's stories come from people who lived through moments they still cannot explain. A sound in an empty room, a stranger at the door, a shadow that moved when no one else was there. Before we step into the dark, leave a comment and tell me where you are listening from tonight. And if you enjoy slow, unsettling, true horror stories, subscribe to Wickless Night. Get comfortable. The lights are already gone. I was once walking my dog along my usual route at around 8 or 9 at night when something happened that I still cannot properly explain. It was not a dangerous part of town or some remote stretch of woods. It was just a suburban park near where I lived, the kind of place people used during the day to walk their dogs, let their kids play, or cut through on their way home. There were paths through the grass, a few benches, some trees around the edges, and enough streetlights nearby that you could see where you were going without needing a torch. During the day, it was completely ordinary. At night, it was usually quiet, not frightening exactly, just empty. Most people were home by then. The families had gone back inside, the kids were off the playground, and the people who used the walking trails had finished their evening exercise. Sometimes I would pass another dog walker or a runner with headphones, but most nights I had the park mostly to myself. That was why I liked taking my dog there. It was peaceful. My dog got a decent walk, and I got some fresh air after being indoors all day. I had been doing that route for a while by then, enough that I knew every bend in the path, every patch of uneven pavement, every tree that hung too low over the trail, and every place where my dog liked to stop and sniff for far too long. Nothing about that night was supposed to be different. I was around 24 at the time, young enough that a serious health problem did not really cross my mind often, but old enough to know that strange physical symptoms were not something you could automatically ignore. I was not out drinking, I was not high, and I had not been doing anything unusual. I had just put on some clothes, clipped the leash onto my dog, and headed out for the same walk I had taken plenty of times before. The weather was normal. It was dark, but not stormy. There was no heavy rain, no strong wind, no lightning, and no strange sound coming from the sky. The air was cool enough that walking felt good. My dog was happy, pulling a little ahead of me the way dogs do when they know they are on familiar ground. We entered the park and followed the usual route. At first, everything was normal. The path was mostly lit by the glow from nearby houses and a few lamps along the road. The trees stood dark against the sky. I could hear the faint sounds of traffic somewhere farther away, but not enough to make the park feel busy. There were insects moving in the grass, leaves shifting lightly in the breeze, and the soft sound of my dog's paws hitting the path. I remember feeling relaxed. There was no strange feeling in the air, no warning, no thought in the back of my mind telling me I should turn around. It was just another night, another walk, another routine that I expected to finish without thinking about it. Then, all at once, my entire vision went bright white. Not like someone had shown a car's headlights directly into my eyes. Not like a camera flash. Not like I had looked at a street lamp for too long. Everything went white. For a couple of seconds, I could not see the path, the trees, my dog, the sky, or anything around me. It was as if the entire world had been covered by a white sheet of light. There was no shape inside it, no clear source, no direction it was coming from. It did not seem like a light was shining at me from one side. It felt like the brightness was everywhere. The first feeling was not fear, It was confusion. My brain could not understand what had happened. One second I was walking in the dark, and the next second my vision was completely gone inside this bright, white flash. I remember stopping in place because I did not know where I was stepping. Then my vision came back. Just like that. The park was there again. The path, the trees, the darkness, my dog. Everything looked normal, but I was not normal. I stood there holding the leash, trying to understand what had just happened. My heart was racing. I felt a rush of panic move through me because my first thought was that something was seriously wrong with my body. I wondered if I was having a stroke. That might sound dramatic, especially for someone my age, but when your entire vision disappears into white for a few seconds, your mind goes straight to the worst possible explanation. I had never experienced anything like it. I had never had a migraine aura. I had never fainted. I had never blacked out. I had never had my vision suddenly disappear or change in that way. I started checking myself without even thinking about it. Could I move both arms? Could I talk normally? Did my face feel strange? Was I dizzy? Was one side of my body weak? I remember trying to say something out loud, even if it was only to hear my own voice. My dog looked up at me, probably confused because I had stopped walking so suddenly. I could still move. I could still breathe. I could still see. Nothing else seemed wrong, but I was shaken. For a minute or two, I stood on the path trying to decide whether I should call someone, sit down, go home immediately, or keep walking. I did not know if the whiteout had lasted 1 second, 2 seconds, or longer. It felt longer because of how sudden it was, but it could not have been more than a brief moment. Still, it was enough to make me feel sick with fear. I looked around for anything that might explain it. There was no car nearby with bright headlights, no cyclist coming toward me with a powerful light, no security light switching on, no lightning, no one holding a torch. There was nothing obvious. The park was as empty as it had been when I entered it. My dog did not seem particularly bothered. He was still sniffing around, still pulling gently at the leash, still acting like he wanted to continue the walk. That almost made me feel better. If something huge and bright had actually flashed around us, I thought maybe he would have reacted. Maybe he would have barked, pulled away, or looked frightened. But he did not. He just acted like a dog on a normal walk. I eventually decided to head home. I did not run, but I walked more quickly than before. I kept watching the sky, the trees, the road, and the dark corners of the park. Every distant light caught my attention. Every sound made me turn my head. I kept waiting for the white flash to happen again. It never did. By the time I got home, I was trying to convince myself that it had been something normal. Maybe my eyes had adjusted badly to a light source I did not notice. Maybe I had looked at something reflective. Maybe I had been more tired than I realized. Maybe I had some brief issue with my vision that meant nothing. Maybe I had simply panicked. But no explanation felt completely right. The strange thing was that this was not the first unsettling thing that had happened on that route. A couple of weeks earlier, I had been walking my dog in the same park when a massive owl came out of a tree and dive-bombed me. That incident had been frightening in a completely different way. I had heard about owls swooping at people before, especially if they were protecting a nest or felt threatened. I knew it was possible, but knowing that something can happen and having it happen to you are two very different things. That night, I had been walking under the trees near the edge of the park. It was dark enough that I could not see much above me. I was focused on the path and on my dog, who was doing what he always did, stopping every few feet to investigate something invisible in the grass. Then there was a sudden rush of movement overhead. I heard wings first, not a soft flutter, a heavy, fast sound, close enough that it made me duck before I even understood what was happening. The owl came down from the tree so quickly that I barely saw it. It was huge, much bigger than I expected. One moment it was hidden in the dark branches above me, and the next moment it was right there, flying low and fast in my direction. It did not actually hit me, but it came close enough that I felt the rush of air from its wings. I stumbled backward and pulled my dog closer. The owl passed over or beside me, then disappeared back into the darkness. I remember looking around frantically, trying to see where it had gone, but it was almost impossible. The trees swallowed it. The night swallowed it. For all I knew, it was sitting on a branch somewhere above me, watching. That had scared me, but I could explain it. It was an owl, a large owl, a wild animal doing what wild animals do. Maybe I had walked too close to its nesting area. Maybe it was protecting its territory. Maybe my dog made it feel threatened. Maybe it had only swooped low because it was hunting something and I got in the way. There were normal explanations. Still, it stayed in my mind. It was hard not to remember how close it had come. Hard not to remember those wings moving through the dark. Hard not to think about how little warning there had been before something large dropped out of a tree right over my head. Then, a couple of weeks later, I had the whiteout. That was when my mind started going places it normally would not go. I am not someone who walks around convinced everything is connected. I do not think every strange noise is a ghost, or every light in the sky is a spaceship. I know people can scare themselves by looking for patterns. I know that once you start connecting unrelated events, ordinary things can begin to feel like signs. But I had heard the stories. I had read about how some people who claim they were abducted say they saw an owl beforehand. Sometimes outside a bedroom window, sometimes near their house, sometimes during an encounter they could not explain. The idea is strange, and I know how ridiculous it can sound when you say it plainly. But once I had been dive-bombed by a huge owl on that exact route, and then experienced a sudden flash of white light that I could not explain, those stories came back to me. That was when the conspiratorial part of my brain kicked in. I started thinking about UFOs, not because I wanted to believe something had taken me, or because I suddenly thought I had become part of some huge secret. It was more that the timing bothered me. An aggressive owl encounter, then a blinding white flash a few weeks later in the same park. It created a connection in my mind that I could not easily shake. I knew that some of the military UFO footage that had been released came from areas only a few miles from where I lived. That fact had always been interesting in a distant way. It was one of those things you might bring up in conversation or see people debate online. You could look at the videos and think they were strange, but it was still easy to separate yourself from it. Military footage, unidentified objects, distant skies, other people's stories. It was not supposed to have anything to do with walking your dog in a quiet suburban park. After the flash, though, that distance felt smaller. I remember standing in my kitchen later that night, replaying the experience in my head. I tried to be honest with myself about what I had actually seen. I had not seen a craft. I had not seen a figure. I had not heard a voice. I had not lost time. I had not woken up somewhere else. I had not found marks on my body or anything dramatic like that. All that happened was that my vision became bright white for a couple of seconds, then returned to normal. That was it. But that was enough to disturb me because I did not know why it happened. The more I thought about it, the more possible explanations came up. Maybe it had been a migraine aura, even without a headache. Maybe it was a brief issue with my eyes. Maybe I had stood up too quickly or had a sudden blood pressure change, though I had been walking normally. Maybe some kind of reflection had caught my eyes at exactly the wrong angle. Maybe I had looked toward a street light or a passing car without realizing it. Maybe I had been tired, stressed, dehydrated, or simply experiencing something physical that I did not understand. Those explanations were all more likely than an abduction. I know that. I am not a complete psycho. I do not believe every unexplained moment is proof of aliens. But the experience still did not feel normal. It was not just a flash at the edge of my vision. It was everything. The whole world went bright for a moment, and there had been no obvious source of light. The suddenness of it was what scared me. There was no build-up, no warning, no time to react. 1 second, I was walking my dog. The next second, I could see nothing except white. Then, the world returned exactly as it had been. For a while after that, I was nervous about taking the same route at night. I still walked my dog, but I paid more attention to the trees. I looked up more often. I watched the sky. I noticed every owl call, every bird moving through the branches, every flicker of light from a nearby house or passing vehicle. The park had not changed. It was still the same suburban place it had always been. Kids still played there during the day. People still walked dogs. Cars passed on the roads nearby. Nothing about it looked haunted or secret or unusual. But I could not completely relax there after dark. Every time I passed the tree where the owl had come from, I looked up. Every time I entered the open section of the path where my vision had gone white, I felt tense. I waited for it to happen again. It never did. That was the only time. No more white flashes, no more missing time, no more strange lights, no more dive-bombing owls. Nothing. Maybe that should make me feel better. And in some ways, it does. The fact that it never happened again makes it easier to tell myself it was a one-time physical issue, or some normal environmental thing I failed to notice. Maybe there was an explanation so simple that I would feel stupid if I ever found out what it was. But there is still a part of me that wonders. Not enough to claim I know what happened. Not enough to say I was abducted. Not enough to start telling everyone aliens are watching people walk dogs at night. But enough that, every now and then, I remember standing on that path while my entire vision went white. Enough that I remember the owl rushing down from the tree a couple of weeks earlier. Enough that I remember how close those military UFO stories felt once something strange happened only a few miles from places connected to them. I do not know what happened to me that night. Maybe it was medical. Maybe it was environmental. Maybe it was just one of those strange things the brain and body can do without warning. Or maybe it was something I will never understand. All I know is that I was 24 years old, walking my dog through a quiet suburban park, when the world suddenly disappeared into bright white light for a few seconds. Then, it came back. And nothing has ever explained it. My wife and I stayed at a bed and breakfast one year for our anniversary. We were not looking for anything spooky or unusual. We just wanted to get away for a couple of days, stay somewhere quiet, eat decent food, and have a break from work and normal life. We had both been busy for a long time, and the anniversary trip was supposed to be simple. A little weekend away, somewhere peaceful, somewhere different from a regular hotel. The place we found was a large country house that had been standing for hundreds of years. It was set back from the road, surrounded by old trees and open land. From the outside it looked impressive, but slightly worn in the way very old buildings often do. It had large windows, a long front porch, old stone steps, and a shape that made it obvious it had been built long before modern homes were designed for convenience. It was not a castle or anything dramatic like that, but it had a lot of character. The house was much bigger than we expected from the photos. It had several floors, long hallways, high ceilings, and rooms that seemed to have been added or changed over the years. Some parts looked carefully restored, while other parts still showed their age. The floorboards creaked in places. The stairs had worn spots from generations of people walking over them. Some of the doors looked newer, but others had old handles and thick wooden frames that probably had not changed much in a very long time. The owners were a young couple, much younger than we expected for people running such an old place. They were friendly, welcoming, and clearly proud of the house. They seemed to genuinely love its history, instead of treating it as something they used only to attract guests. When we checked in, they told us a little about the property and how long it had been there. They had spent years fixing it up, room by room, trying to keep its original features while still making it comfortable enough for people to stay there. They also kept a history book in every guest room. The book was not just a short pamphlet with a few old photographs. It was thick, detailed, and full of stories about the house. It explained when the property had been built, who had owned it, what parts of the building had changed over time, and how the area around it had developed. There were old photographs, hand-drawn maps, copies of records, and descriptions of renovations from different periods. I found it more interesting than I expected to. I am not usually the type of person who gets deeply invested in the history of a building, but this house had clearly been through a lot. It had survived periods where it was doing well, then periods where it was neglected and nearly falling apart. At one point, it had apparently been close to being abandoned completely. There were sections in the book describing roof damage, water leaks, broken windows, and years when nobody seemed willing to spend the money to keep it in good condition. It had changed hands several times. It had been used for different purposes over the years. There had been periods when parts of it were closed off because they were unsafe. There had been renovations that saved certain rooms and removed others. It had been built during the colonial era, which made it old enough that its history felt bigger than any one family or any one generation. People had lived there, worked there, raised children there, grown old there, and died there long before my wife and I ever showed up for an anniversary trip. That was the part I found interesting. Not ghosts, not haunted stories, not paranormal stuff. I have never been someone who believes in ghosts or the afterlife. I do not say that in a smug way. I just tend to look for normal explanations. Old buildings make noises. Strange dreams happen when you are sleeping somewhere unfamiliar. People see patterns when they already expect a place to be creepy. I understand why people enjoy ghost stories, especially in old houses, but I have never really believed that a spirit from the past is waiting around in a hallway for guests. Still, the house had an atmosphere. I would not call it scary during the day. It was actually pleasant. Sunlight came through the windows, the dining room felt warm, and the owners had made the place comfortable. There were flowers in the common rooms, old furniture that looked carefully restored, and framed pictures on the walls. It felt like the kind of place where people came for quiet weekends, small celebrations, or a break from city life. But at night, it felt different. That is probably true of any old house. Once the lights were lower and most people had gone to their rooms, the hallways became darker than they did during the day. The creaking floorboards were more noticeable. The wind outside seemed louder against the windows. Doors made small sounds when the temperature changed. Pipes clicked and settled behind the walls. The whole building had that deep nighttime silence that only happens when you are somewhere unfamiliar and everyone else is asleep. Our room was on one of the upper floors. It was large, with a tall bed, old-fashioned furniture, and windows that looked out over the dark grounds around the house. There was a small sitting area near one wall, a dresser, and an old wardrobe that probably had been there for decades. The room had clearly been renovated, but it still kept the look of the house. Nothing about it felt modern in the usual sense. There was a history book placed neatly on a small table near the bed. After dinner, my wife and I spent some time reading through it together. We flipped through old pictures of the house and laughed at how different the rooms had looked over the years. Some parts of the building had once been covered in ugly wallpaper. Other rooms had been painted strange colors during different decades. There were photographs of the house when it had looked almost abandoned, with overgrown grounds and broken sections of the roof. We talked about how much work it must have taken to restore the place. At one point, my wife made a comment about how she could never live in such a large old house because every sound at night would make her think someone was walking around. I laughed and said that old buildings just have personalities. They shift, creak, settle, and make noises that newer homes do not make. Neither of us was afraid. The idea of the house being haunted did not even come up. Eventually, we got ready for bed. The room was dark, except for a little light coming through the curtains. I do not remember whether it was moonlight or a weak light from the grounds outside, but there was just enough to make out the basic shape of the room. The furniture was visible in shadow. The door was visible across from the bed. The old wardrobe stood in the corner like a dark rectangle against the wall. We talked for a little while longer, then fell asleep. At some point during the night, I had a dream. At least I believe it was a dream. That is the only explanation that really makes sense to me. But it did not feel like a normal dream. Most dreams are strange in obvious ways. You are in places that do not make sense, talking to people who should not be there, doing things that change suddenly without explanation. This dream was different because it began exactly where I was. The room looked like the real room. My wife was beside me in bed. The furniture was where it should have been. The darkness looked the same as the darkness I had fallen asleep in. In the dream, my wife and I were asleep. I was not watching us from across the room or seeing things from a strange angle. I was in bed, lying there in the same position I had been in when I went to sleep. I could feel the room around me. I could hear the silence of the house. Everything felt completely normal at first. Then the bedroom door suddenly opened. It did not open slowly. It flew open. A woman rushed into the room. She was dressed like a maid from another time. Not in a costume-like way, not exaggerated or theatrical, but in the kind of traditional maid outfit you would expect to see in an old period drama. She wore a dark dress with a pale apron. Her clothes looked old-fashioned, practical, and completely out of place in a modern bed and breakfast. The strange thing is that I had not been watching any period shows at the time. I had not been reading anything about maids or old household staff. I had not seen Downton Abbey or anything similar that would have planted that image in my mind. It was not something I had been thinking about before bed. But there she was. The woman burst into the room with a look of complete panic on her face. She looked terrified. Not startled, not confused. Terrified, she moved as if she had been running from someone or something. Her eyes were wide, and her breathing looked quick, though I do not remember clearly hearing it. She came through the doorway, turned immediately, and pushed the door shut behind her. The door closed hard. I remember the sound of it. It was not a loud slam, but it was firm, urgent, like she needed that door closed immediately, like whatever was outside the room had been close enough that even one more second with the door open would have been dangerous. Then she stood with her back against the door for a moment. She looked toward the bed, toward me. The room felt colder. I do not know whether the temperature actually changed in the dream or whether that was part of the fear, but I remember the sensation clearly. The air felt heavy. The space around the bed felt suddenly smaller. It was as though the entire room had become focused on her. For 1 second, she stayed still. Then she ran straight toward me. She did not move toward my wife. She did not run toward the window. She did not head for the bathroom or another hiding place. She came directly toward my side of the bed. Her face was panicked, but there was something else in it too. It looked like she was trying to warn me, or ask me for help, or reach me before something else could. I could not tell which. That was the part that scared me most. She was not looking at me like I was a stranger she had surprised in a room. She was looking at me as if she knew I needed to understand something, like she had come to find me, like she had chosen that room for a reason. As she reached the bed, I woke up. I came awake so suddenly that for a few seconds I did not know where I was. My heart was racing. I was breathing hard. The room was still dark. My wife was beside me. The furniture was where it should have been. But I felt the same panic from the dream. I sat up quickly. I think I may have screamed. Not a long scream, but enough that my wife woke up and immediately asked what was wrong. She was confused and alarmed because I was sitting there in bed, staring toward the door, breathing like I had just been chased. The bedroom door was closed. Nothing was standing near it. Nobody was in the room. The hallway outside was quiet. For a moment, I just stared at the door. I had the strong feeling that if I looked away from it, it might open again. My wife asked me what happened. I told her I had a nightmare. That was the easiest way to explain it. I told her I dreamed that a maid had run into the room, shut the door, and rushed toward me like she was trying to warn me about something. Saying it out loud made it sound strange, but not impossible. It was still a dream. People have strange dreams in unfamiliar places all the time. My wife tried to calm me down. She said I probably had the dream because of the history book and the age of the house. That made sense. We had spent time reading about the colonial era, old owners, renovations, and the long history of the building. My brain could have taken all of that and turned it into a nightmare. That explanation should have been enough. And honestly, I still think it probably was. But I could not shake the feeling of the dream. It was not just scary because there was a woman in old clothes. It was scary because of how urgent it felt. The woman did not seem threatening. She seemed frightened. She seemed desperate to get into the room and desperate to reach me. The dream had no ending, no explanation. I never saw what she was running from. I never knew why she shut the door. I never knew whether she wanted help or was trying to warn us. That uncertainty stayed with me. For the rest of the night, I had trouble falling back asleep. Every sound in the house felt louder. When the floorboards creaked somewhere in the hallway, I opened my eyes. When wind pressed against the windows, I looked toward the curtains. When the pipes made a faint sound inside the wall, I found myself listening to see whether it sounded like footsteps. Nothing else happened. No door opened. No one knocked. No voice called from the hallway. No strange figure appeared again. Eventually, I fell asleep, but not deeply. The next morning, everything seemed normal. Sunlight came through the windows. The room looked warm and harmless. The old furniture was just furniture. The door was just a door. The history book was still sitting on the table where we had left it. At breakfast, we talked with the owners a little more about the building. I thought about asking whether there had ever been a maid who worked there, or whether anything strange had happened in the house, but I did not. I did not want to sound like someone looking for ghost stories. I also did not want to give the dream more importance than it deserved. The owners seemed nice, and I did not want to make them uncomfortable by asking if their bed and breakfast was haunted. So I said nothing. We finished our stay, packed our things, and went home. For the most part, I did not think about it much afterward. Life moved on. The anniversary trip became one more memory from a weekend away. We remembered the food, the beautiful old house, the history book, and how nice it had been to get out of town for a while. But every now and then, especially when someone talks about strange dreams or old buildings, I remember that night. I remember the door opening. I remember the woman rushing in. I remember her old-fashioned maid clothing, even though I had not been watching anything that would have put that image in my head. I remember her slamming the door closed behind her as if something was coming. And I remember the way she looked at me before running toward the bed. I have tried to explain it logically. Maybe the old house got into my head more than I realized. Maybe reading the history book before sleep gave my mind enough material to create a dream set in another time. Maybe I had heard something outside the room while I slept, and my brain turned that sound into the woman bursting through the door. Maybe the unfamiliar room, the strange shadows, and the age of the house created a nightmare that felt more real than usual. All of that is possible, probably likely. I do not believe in ghosts. I do not believe people remain trapped in old houses for centuries. I do not believe that someone from the colonial era would suddenly appear in a modern guest room to warn a stranger about something. But even with all of that, the dream still scares me when I remember it. Because I have had nightmares before, and they usually feel disconnected from reality. This one did not. This one felt like it happened in the real room, while my wife and I were sleeping. It felt like the woman had come through the actual door, looked at the actual bed, and rushed toward me for a reason I could not understand. I never found out whether the house had any stories connected to a maid or a woman who had once worked there. I never went back to ask. Maybe there was nothing to ask about. Maybe she was only a dream. But it was one of the most vivid and frightening dreams I have ever had, and I still remember the panic in her face as clearly as if she had been standing there for real. When I was at the end of high school, or maybe just after I had graduated, some friends and I decided to go down an old road late at night to see something people in the area simply called the light. It was one of those local stories that everyone seemed to know about, even if nobody could explain it properly. You would hear older kids mention it at parties, or somebody would bring it up when people were talking about strange places to go after dark. The story was always a little different depending on who told it. Some people said it was just a weird reflection from the highway. Some said it was swamp gas, even though nobody really seemed to know what swamp gas was supposed to look like, or why it would appear in the same place. Others said it was a ghost light, something that had been seen on that road for years. Nobody called it by a special name, it was just the light. The old road was outside town, far enough away that you did not end up there by accident. It was not a main road anymore. It had once connected to somewhere important, I guess, but by the time we were old enough to drive, it had become more of a forgotten stretch of pavement and broken gravel. The road had trees growing close to both sides, tall grass pushing through cracks near the edges, and very few houses anywhere around it. There were no streetlights. There were no shops. There was no reason to drive out there unless you knew about it already. That was probably part of why it had become such a place for teenagers. When you are that age, there is always something exciting about going somewhere adults tell you not to go. Even if nobody directly says, "Do not go down that road," the fact that it is isolated and carries a strange story makes it feel like a challenge. You want to be the one who finally sees the thing everyone talks about. You want proof. You want to say you were there. At least, that was how we felt before we actually got there. There were a few of us in the car that night. I cannot remember every person who came along now, but I remember the general mood. Everyone was excited at first. We had been joking around, listening to music, talking over each other, and acting like the whole thing was just another late-night drive. Nobody was seriously afraid. Even the people who claimed they believed the stories did not sound like they truly expected anything to happen. We were mostly going because we were bored. That is probably the honest answer. High school had just ended, or was ending, and we were in that strange time where nobody knew exactly what was next. Some people were going to college. Some were getting jobs. Some were staying around town. Some people were already drifting away from the friend group. At the time, though, none of that mattered much. We had a car, a night with nothing planned, and a local legend waiting at the end of an old road. So we went. The farther we drove from town, the quieter everyone became. At first, there were still houses around. Then there were fewer. Then there were only scattered driveways, mailboxes, and dark fields beyond the headlights. The radio was still playing, but it had been turned down. Outside the windows, there was nothing except the road ahead and the trees on both sides. It was late, but I do not think it was extremely late. Maybe around 11, maybe closer to midnight. The sky was clear enough that we could see stars above the tree line when the road opened up. But the road itself was almost completely black outside of the car's headlights. The headlights made everything look strange. They lit a narrow strip of pavement ahead of us, then the road disappeared into darkness. The trees flashed by on either side, their trunks appearing and vanishing in seconds. Every curve in the road felt sharper than it probably was. Every shadow beyond the headlights looked deeper. We drove as far down the old road as we could. Eventually, we reached a point where the road became too rough to continue. The pavement was broken up badly, with weeds growing through parts of it and tree branches hanging low over the path. There may have been some kind of gate or barrier farther ahead, or maybe the road was simply too damaged to risk driving on. I do not remember the exact reason we stopped. I only remember that we parked the car at the farthest point we could reasonably reach. After that, we got out and continued on foot. That was the part that changed the feeling of the night. Inside the car, it had still felt like a joke. We were together, the doors were locked, the music was there, and we could leave whenever we wanted. But once we got out and started walking down the old road, it became much quieter. The sound of the car faded behind us. There were no engines, no music, no lights except the moon, the stars, and the torches on our phones. The road stretched ahead into darkness. The woods on both sides seemed too close. I remember hearing our shoes against the rough pavement and gravel. Somebody laughed nervously. Somebody else said something about how stupid it was that we were actually doing this. We kept walking, mostly because nobody wanted to be the first person to say they wanted to go back. The local story said the light would appear farther down the road. Nobody seemed to agree on how far. Some people said it showed up near an old bend. Some said you had to walk until you reached a certain clearing. Some said it appeared only if you turned your lights off or stood quietly. Other people said it only appeared when it wanted to. We did not really know what we were looking for. We just kept walking. For a few minutes, nothing happened. The road was empty. The trees were still. We could hear insects somewhere in the grass and the occasional movement of leaves in the breeze. It was uncomfortable, but not frightening yet. I remember thinking that maybe this would be one of those nights where we walked around, saw nothing, laughed about it, and drove home. Then, someone stopped. At first, I thought they had tripped or heard something, but they were staring down the road. We all looked in the same direction, and there it was. Where there had been nothing only seconds before, A white orb of light appeared farther down the road. It was not like a car turning on its headlights. There was no beam shining toward us. There was no engine sound. There was no glow from a house, a street lamp, or anything else nearby. It was just a round, white light hanging in the darkness. For a moment, nobody spoke. We all stood there, staring at it. The thing that made it so strange was that it did not really light up the area around it. A normal, bright light should have thrown some kind of glow onto the road or the trees. If a car had been sitting there, we should have seen some reflection off the road. If someone had been holding a torch, we should have seen a beam or a moving shadow. But this light did not do that. It was bright enough that we could see it clearly. It was obviously there. But it did not seem to illuminate much of anything around it. The road beneath it stayed mostly dark. The trees beside it stayed dark. There was no person standing behind it, no vehicle, no structure, no source that made sense. It just hovered there. Someone whispered, "That's it." Nobody asked what they meant. We all knew. That was the light. I remember feeling a strange kind of disbelief. I had expected nothing. Maybe a reflection. Maybe a distant highway light. Maybe some stupid prank. But this was not any of those things. It was too isolated, too clear, and too still. The orb did not move. It stayed in the same place, floating or hovering just above the road, though it was hard to tell exactly how high it was from where we stood. It might have been at head height. It might have been higher. The darkness around it made distance hard to judge. For a while, we just watched it. Nobody went closer. Nobody had the courage to walk toward it. We were still trying to act tough, but the jokes had changed. Before, we had been making fun of the legend. Now, the jokes were forced. People laughed a little too loudly. Someone said it was probably a drone. Someone else said it had to be a person messing with us. But nobody could explain why there was no person, no sound, and no visible source. One of my friends pulled out their phone, probably trying to record it. I do not know if the video worked. I do not remember anyone showing footage afterward. Maybe the phone was too old, maybe the darkness made it impossible to capture, or maybe nobody even thought about recording properly because we were too busy staring. The light remained there, white, still, silent then, because we were teenagers, and because teenagers often make bad choices when they are nervous. Someone started yelling at it. At first, it was just one insult. Something stupid and loud shouted down the empty road. We all laughed, but it was the kind of laugh people make when they are scared and do not want to admit it. Then another person joined in. More insults. More yelling. People started calling it names, daring it to come closer, acting like being rude to something unexplained would somehow prove they were not afraid. I remember standing there and thinking this was a terrible idea, not because I knew the light could do anything, but because I suddenly had the strong feeling that whatever it was, we should not be provoking it. The woods had gone quiet. Even the insects seemed less loud. The road felt still in a way that made every word we shouted sound wrong. Then the light changed. It did not fade. It did not blink. It turned red. The white orb became a deep red light, bright enough that it looked unnatural against the darkness. It was not a warm orange like a car brake light. It was not the soft red of a distant warning light. It looked sharp, vivid, and angry. For 1 second, everyone went silent. I remember the exact feeling in my stomach when it changed. It was like every joke suddenly became a mistake. Then it started moving. At first, it only shifted slightly. Then it began coming toward us, not rolling along the road, not swaying the way a person with a torch might walk. It moved directly toward us. The distance between us and the red light started closing. Fast. Someone screamed. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was someone else. I honestly do not know. But the second the light began moving at us, every person there turned around and ran. There was no discussion. No one said, "Let's go." Nobody waited to see what it would do. We ran. I remember the sound of shoes pounding against the broken road. I remember people breathing hard and shouting behind me. I remember the phone torch in my hand bouncing wildly, lighting up the ground in quick flashes. Gravel slipped under my shoes. Tree branches seemed to reach out from the sides of the road. All I could think about was getting back to the car. The road felt much longer than it had before. When we had walked down it, we had been slow, talking, laughing, and stopping to look around. Now it seemed endless. Every step felt like it took too long. I kept expecting the red light to appear beside us, behind us, or ahead of us. I did not want to look back. But I did, just once. The red light was still there. It was farther down the road than I expected, but it was moving. I could not tell how fast. I could not tell whether it was floating above the road or just coming closer in some strange way. It seemed to be following the line of the road toward us. That was enough. I ran faster. We reached the car in a panic. Somebody grabbed the keys. Somebody else was yelling to unlock the doors. People were trying to get in at the same time, pushing past each other, slamming doors, dropping phones, and shouting over one another. For a few seconds, it felt like the car would not start fast enough. The engine turned over. The headlights came on. And suddenly, we had light again. Real light. Normal light. The beam from the car spread down the road, cutting through the darkness in front of us. We all looked back. The red light was no longer moving toward us. It was hovering farther down the old road. Still there, still red. It looked small from where we were now, but we could see it clearly enough. It sat in the darkness where it had been before, as though it had stopped the moment we reached the vehicle. Nobody wanted to wait and see if it would move again. The driver put the car in reverse, turned us around as quickly as possible, and got us out of there. We drove away fast. I do not remember much about the ride back. I know we were all talking at once at first, trying to understand what had happened. Some people were swearing, some were laughing nervously. Someone kept saying that it had turned red because we insulted it. Someone else said that was impossible, and we were all just freaking ourselves out. But none of us really believed it was nothing. We had all seen the white orb appear where there had been nothing. We had all watched it hover in the road. We had all seen it turn red. And we had all run when it started moving toward us. For years afterward, I heard different explanations for what the light might have been. Some people said swamp gas. That was probably the explanation that came up the most, because it is the kind of thing people say when they want to explain a strange light in a rural area without admitting they do not know what it is. Others said it might have been lights from a highway, somewhere beyond the trees. But the road was isolated, and the light had appeared in a place where there had been no cars, no traffic, and no visible road beyond it. Some said it was a reflection. Some said it was a distant house light. Some said someone was playing a prank. But none of those explanations explained everything. A highway light does not appear from nowhere in the middle of an old road. A reflection does not hover in one place without lighting up anything around it. A prankster with a flashlight does not make an orb turn from white to red and move toward a group of people without being seen. And if it had been a person, where were they? There was nowhere to hide nearby that we could see. The road had trees on both sides, but we could see enough of the area around the orb to know there was no vehicle, no house, and no obvious person standing there. The road has since been destroyed and built over. The area changed over time. What had been an old, forgotten road became part of new development, construction, and whatever came afterward. I cannot go back there now, even if I wanted to. There is no way to walk down that same stretch of pavement, stand in the same place, and wait for the light to appear again. Part of me wishes I could, not because I want to see it another time, exactly, but because I want an explanation. I want to know whether the light was something ordinary that looked strange in the dark. I want to know if there was a hidden highway or reflection we did not understand. I want to know if somebody had been pulling the same prank on teenagers for years. But another part of me is glad the road is gone, because I still remember the moment it turned red. I still remember how every person with me stopped joking at the exact same time, and I still remember the feeling of running back to the car while something that had been hovering silently in the darkness began coming toward us. Maybe it was swamp gas. Maybe it was a highway light. Maybe it was something scientific that nobody ever properly explained. Or maybe the old road had something on it that did not like being shouted at. I do not know what it was, but I know it was there. Before the next story begins, thank you for staying here in the dark. If this is your first visit, subscribe to Wickless Night for more true stories made for the late hours, when the world is quiet and every little noise feels important. You can also leave a like and tell me which story has made you look around the room so far. Now, let's continue. Mom was in an abusive relationship when I was a teenager. At the time, I did not really understand every part of what was going on between them. I knew he was bad for her. I knew he was controlling, angry, and miserable to be around. I knew the atmosphere in the house changed whenever he was there. It was like everyone had to watch what they said and how they acted, because you never knew what might set him off. He was the kind of person who could make an entire room feel tense without even saying anything. Sometimes he would sit quietly, staring at the television or drinking something, and you could still feel the anger coming off him. Other times he would complain about everything. He complained about my mom, the house, money, people he knew, people he did not know, the weather, work, and whatever else he could find to be unhappy about. I was a teenager then, so I mostly tried to stay away from him. I did not want to have conversations with him. I did not care what he thought. I did not want to hear his stories, his complaints, or his excuses. I knew he treated my mom badly, and that was enough for me. He was an asshole, plain and simple. At the time, my mom and her boyfriend shared the attic room. It was the largest bedroom in the house, but it never felt comfortable to me. The attic had been converted into a bedroom years earlier. It had slanted ceilings, small windows, and that strange feeling old attic rooms sometimes have, where the walls seem closer than they should be. During the day, it was not too bad. Sunlight came through the windows, and the room looked normal enough. But at night, it felt different. The shadows near the slanted ceiling got darker, and the corners of the room seemed deeper than they should have been. You could hear the house settling more clearly from up there. The old wood would creak. Pipes would make strange noises. Wind would push against the outside walls and make the windows shake slightly. I never liked being up there for long. Maybe it was because I knew my mom and her boyfriend slept there. Maybe it was because I associated the room with their arguments. There were nights when I could hear voices coming down through the ceiling or the hallway. Sometimes it was quiet arguing. Sometimes it was loud enough that I could understand words, though I tried not to listen. Either way, the attic room always felt like a place that held too much tension. Every once in a while, my mom's boyfriend would say something strange about the room. At first, I thought he was just trying to get attention. He would claim that a woman appeared over the bed at night. He said she stood above him while he slept, watching him. Sometimes he said she would try to lure him out of the room. Other times he said he would wake up feeling like someone had called his name, or pulled at him, trying to make him leave the attic. He never described it in a calm or sensible way. He would talk about it with this strange mixture of fear and anger, like he wanted someone to believe him, but also wanted to act tough about it. He would say things like, "There's something up there," or "That woman keeps trying to get me out of that room." I never knew exactly what he meant. Did he mean he was dreaming? Did he mean he was sleepwalking? Did he mean he was seeing things because he drank too much, did not sleep properly, or had something else wrong with him? I did not care enough to ask. Honestly, I did not give a shit about anything he had to say. He was abusive to my mom. He made life harder for everyone around him. If he claimed some woman was standing over his bed at night, I assumed it was either a dream, guilt, alcohol, or just another way for him to make everything about himself. Part of me even thought it was fitting. Maybe he was having nightmares because of the way he treated my mom. Maybe his own mind was punishing him. But I never took it seriously. I never sat there wondering if the attic was haunted. I never went up there to investigate. I never thought about the woman he described once he left the room. To me, it was just one more strange thing said by a man I wanted out of our lives. Eventually, he was gone. The relationship ended, and after a while, the house began to feel different. It did not become perfect overnight. Things like that leave damage behind. There was still stress, still memories, still the uncomfortable feeling of knowing what my mom had gone through. But he was no longer there, and that alone changed everything. The arguments stopped. The tension in the house slowly faded. People could speak normally again. Doors could close without everyone wondering if someone was angry behind them. My mom seemed lighter over time, even though healing was not simple. It took a while before things felt normal, but at least he was gone and nobody wanted him back. A few years later, I ended up taking over the attic room as my bedroom. By then, I was older. The room had been cleaned out, rearranged, and made to feel like mine. I put my own things in there. My clothes, my furniture, my music, my posters, whatever I had at the time. Once I started sleeping up there, I got used to the slanted ceiling and the sounds of the house. At first, I thought about what my mom's ex had said. Not because I believed him, but because it was hard not to remember when I was lying in the exact same room. I would look at the ceiling sometimes and think about how ridiculous he had sounded. I would wonder where exactly he claimed the woman appeared. Near the bed? Near the door? By the window? But after a while, I stopped thinking about it. Nothing happened. The room was quiet. It was just a bedroom. The strange stories belonged to him, and he was gone. I slept up there for a long time without any problem. I had friends over. I watched movies. I listened to music late at night. I spent hours on my phone or computer. I did all the normal things a young person does in their bedroom. The attic became mine. And then, one night, something happened that made me remember every word he had ever said. My girlfriend at the time was staying over. She was my girlfriend then, though she is my ex now. We were both young, and it was a normal night. Nothing strange had happened earlier. We had probably watched something, talked for a while, and eventually gone to sleep. There was no creepy movie, no scary conversation, and no reason for me to have ghosts or anything like that on my mind. The room was dark. The house was quiet. At some point in the middle of the night, I woke up. I do not know what woke me. Maybe it was a sound. Maybe it was a feeling. Maybe I just came out of sleep naturally for no reason. At first, I was not fully awake. I had that heavy, confused feeling where you know you are in your room, but your mind is still partly inside a dream. I remember lying there, trying to understand why I had opened my eyes. Then, I saw someone standing over the bed. It was a woman. She was close enough that I could see the outline of her body clearly against the dark room. She was not standing near the door or across the room. She was right there, beside the bed, leaning or standing over us. For one terrible second, I did not understand what I was seeing. My brain tried to tell me it was my girlfriend standing up. Maybe she had gotten out of bed. Maybe she was going to the bathroom. Maybe I was still dreaming. But then I realized my girlfriend was still beside me. I could feel her body in the bed. She was asleep. The woman standing over us was someone else. I froze. The woman looked angry. That is the strongest thing I remember about her. I cannot clearly describe every detail of her face now. I do not know what she was wearing. I do not know whether her hair was dark or light. I do not even know whether she looked young or old. But I remember the anger. Her face had a look that made my whole body react before I could think about it. It was not a calm expression. It was not a sad or empty expression. She looked furious, like she had caught someone doing something wrong, like she was there for a reason. And that reason involved us. For a moment, she did not move. She just stood there, looking down at the bed. At me. At my girlfriend. I remember my chest tightening so badly that I could barely breathe. I wanted to convince myself it was a dream. I wanted to tell myself I was seeing clothes hanging in a corner, or shadows from the window, or something my tired brain had turned into a person. But she looked too clear, too close, too real. I screamed. It was not a planned scream. It came out of me before I could stop it. A full terrified scream that broke the silence of the room and woke my girlfriend immediately. She sat up fast, confused and frightened. The moment she woke up, the woman disappeared. She did not walk away. She did not turn around. She did not move toward the door. She was simply gone. 1 second she was standing over the bed, staring down at us with that angry expression. The next second there was nothing there. The space beside the bed was empty. My girlfriend was asking me what was wrong. I could barely speak. My heart was pounding so hard I felt sick. I was staring at the place where the woman had been, trying to make sense of it. The room looked normal again. The slanted ceiling was there. The window was there. My furniture was there. Nothing had moved. There was no sound in the house. No footsteps, no door opening or closing, just silence. My girlfriend kept asking me what happened. I told her I thought I saw someone standing over the bed. At first, I think she assumed I had a nightmare. That would have been the normal explanation. I had woken up suddenly, screamed and looked terrified. Of course, she thought it was a dream. But I could not shake the feeling that I had been awake. I remembered seeing the room. I remembered seeing her beside me asleep. I remembered the woman's angry face. And I remembered how the woman vanished only after my girlfriend woke up. We stayed awake for a while after that. Neither of us wanted to turn the lights off straight away. My girlfriend tried to calm me down, but I was still shaken. I kept looking toward the same spot beside the bed. I kept expecting to see the woman again. She never came back that night. Eventually, exhaustion took over and we fell asleep again. But I did not sleep deeply. Every little noise in the house woke me. Every creak made me open my eyes. Every shadow looked like it could become a figure standing over the bed. The next morning, I told my mom what happened. I did not really want to tell her. I was embarrassed. I knew how it sounded. I was older now, and I did not want to come downstairs saying I had seen a ghost. Part of me expected her to laugh or say I had been dreaming. Instead, she got quiet. Then she told me what she thought. She said maybe there had always been a spirit in that attic. Not an evil one. Exactly. Maybe a woman. Maybe someone who did not like seeing women mistreated. She brought up her ex-boyfriend's stories again. She said he used to claim a woman would appear over the bed and lure him out of the room. At the time, none of us had understood what he meant. But after hearing what I saw, my mom wondered if it had been the same woman. Her idea was that the spirit may have been protective. Maybe she did not like him because of the way he treated my mom. Maybe she tried to lure him away from the room because she wanted him gone. Maybe she was angry at him. Then my mom looked at me and said that perhaps the woman had appeared that night because my girlfriend was sleeping in the room with me. Maybe she was watching over her. Maybe she was making sure I was not hurting her. That thought hit me in a strange way. At first, it made me uncomfortable. I did not like the idea that something had been standing over my bed, staring at my girlfriend, judging me. I did not like the idea that the woman might have looked angry because she thought I was doing something wrong. But the more I thought about it, the more I understood why my mom saw it that way. The woman had not touched us. She had not harmed anyone. She had not chased me. She had only stood there, looking angry, looking watchful. And then she vanished when I screamed and my girlfriend woke up. Maybe she had been nothing more than a dream. Maybe I had been half awake and still imagining things. Maybe it was sleep paralysis, even though I could move and scream. Maybe the shadows in the attic room had formed into a face because I already knew the story of the woman who supposedly appeared there. That would make sense. I had heard the story years before. Even though I did not care about it at the time, maybe it stayed somewhere in my mind. Maybe sleeping in the same room where my mom's ex had claimed to see a woman gave my brain material for a nightmare. That is the explanation I have tried to accept. But there are details that still make it hard. I did not go to sleep thinking about his stories. I had not talked about him in a long time. I did not even expect anything strange to happen in that room, and the woman's expression felt too specific to me. It was not just a vague shadow or a random nightmare face. She looked angry. Not angry at me exactly, but angry in a way that felt protective of someone else. Maybe that was my own guilt or fear. Maybe I had grown up seeing what an abusive relationship did to my mom, and deep down I was afraid of ever becoming like him. Maybe seeing a woman staring down at my girlfriend was my mind forcing me to confront that fear. That is possible too. Sometimes the scariest things we see are built from things we already carry inside us. But even if that is true, it does not make the experience less frightening. I still remember waking up in the dark attic room. I still remember seeing a woman standing over the bed. I still remember her angry face. I still remember the scream that woke my girlfriend. And I still remember looking back at the spot where the woman had been and seeing nothing there. After that night, I never saw her again. I continued sleeping in the attic room for a while. Nothing else happened. No strange footsteps, no shadows, no voices, no one standing over the bed. The room stayed quiet, but I never felt completely alone in it again. Sometimes I would lie awake at night and think about the woman my mom's ex claimed to see. I would wonder whether he had been lying, dreaming, drunk, or trying to manipulate my mom. I would wonder whether he had seen something real and did not understand what it was. And I would wonder whether the woman who stood over my bed had been the same one. I do not know if there was really a spirit in that attic. I do not know if she was vengeful, protective, or something else entirely. I do not know if I was half asleep and still dreaming when I saw her, but I know it was one of the scariest things I have ever experienced. Because for one moment, in a room where a cruel man once claimed a woman would appear at night, I woke up and found someone standing over my bed. And she looked angry. In high school, some friends and I used to go to the park next to our school at night all the time. It was one of those things we did because we were teenagers, bored, and had nowhere else to go. There was nothing special about the park during the day. It had a few benches, a small playground area, a path that ran around the edge, some open grass, and a line of trees that separated it from the road. During school hours, it was just another place students cut through on their way home or sat around during lunch when the weather was nice. At night, it became our usual place to hang out. We had probably gone there hundreds of times, maybe not literally a billion times, but enough that none of us thought twice about it. We knew where the lights were, which ones worked and which ones flickered. We knew where we could sit without being easily seen from the road. We knew which bench was most comfortable, where the ground was uneven, and which route back to the school parking lot was quickest if a teacher, parent, or police car happened to come by. Most of the time, nothing happened. We would sit around talking about school, people we liked, teachers we hated, rumors, music, parties we were probably not invited to, and all the small things that feel important when you are 16 or 17. Sometimes someone would bring food or drinks. Sometimes we would just sit there in silence, looking at our phones or staring at the dark trees. It was never meant to be scary. It was just somewhere we could be away from adults for a while. That was why the night this happened felt so strange from the beginning. There was no obvious reason for it. Nothing had happened at school that day. Nobody had told a creepy story before we went there. There was no storm coming in, no strange weather, and no reason for any of us to be nervous. It was just one of those nights when the air feels different before anything even happens. I remember walking toward the park with my friends and noticing how quiet everything was. Usually, even late at night, there was some noise around the school. You could hear traffic from the nearby road. There might be cars pulling out of a restaurant or convenience store farther down the street. Sometimes people were walking their dogs or cutting through the park to get home. There would be distant voices, music from a car, or the sound of someone's house in the neighborhood nearby. That night, there was almost nothing. The road was quiet. The school building was dark. The park lights seemed dimmer than usual. I remember looking toward the playground and feeling like the shadows were thicker than they should have been. The trees at the far edge of the park blended together into one solid black line. Normally, you could make out the trunks, branches, and small gaps between them. That night, they looked like a wall. I did not say anything at first. I did not want to be the person who made everyone uncomfortable by saying, "This place feels weird tonight." We had all been there too many times for that. I figured I was probably just tired. Or maybe I had watched something creepy earlier and it was sitting in the back of my mind. So I followed my friends to the usual place. We sat where we normally sat, near one of the benches just off the main path. It was close enough to the park lights that we could see each other, but far enough away that we were still mostly hidden from the road. The grass was slightly damp, and the air had that cold night smell, like leaves, dirt, and wet pavement. At first, we talked normally. Someone was complaining about a teacher. Someone else was telling a story about a friend who had gotten in trouble. I remember laughing at something, but I could not tell you what it was now. The details of the conversation disappeared from my memory, because after a few minutes, I started noticing that one of my friends had gone quiet. He was sitting a little apart from the rest of us. At first, I did not think much of it. He was often quieter than the others, and sometimes people just got lost in their thoughts. But then I noticed he was not looking at his phone or staring at the ground. He was staring straight ahead, not at the path, not at the playground, at the darkness beyond the park. His face had changed slightly. He looked tense. His shoulders were tight, and he was looking in one specific direction, like he had noticed something but was trying to decide whether it was real. I asked him what was wrong. He did not answer right away. I remember saying something simple like, "What are you looking at?" He shrugged at first, but it was not a casual shrug. It was the kind people do when they do not want to talk about something because they are worried they will sound stupid. Then he said, "Nothing. I just thought I saw something." I tried to laugh. I did not really find it funny, but laughing felt easier than admitting I already had a bad feeling about the park. I probably made some joke about him seeing a ghost or someone hiding in the trees. I expected him to roll his eyes or laugh back. He did not. He kept staring into the darkness. That was when I started paying closer attention. At first, I could not see anything. The far side of the park was mostly dark. There were a few weak lights from the path, but they did not reach much farther than a small circle around each pole. Beyond that, there was grass, then trees, then whatever lay behind them. It was hard to tell where the park ended and the darkness began. I looked in the direction my friend was facing. For a few seconds, I saw nothing but shadows. Then I saw it. It was about 500 feet ahead of us, maybe farther. Distance is hard to judge in the dark, but it was far enough away that I could not see details clearly. It stood near the edge of the open grass, close to where the trees began. At first, I thought it might be a person. Then I thought it might be a child. It was small. The shape was too short to be an adult, or at least it looked that way from where we were sitting. It had the outline of a little person standing still in the distance, but it was not dark like a normal person standing against the night. It was pale, white, almost. Not bright white like someone shining a torch. Not the color of a shirt under a street lamp. It looked soft and faint, like light had gathered around it. I could see the shape of it, but I could not make out clothes or a face. For a moment, I stared at it without understanding what I was looking at. The figure did not seem solid. That was the first thing that made my stomach drop. It looked fluid, almost wavy. It moved in a way that did not look like walking. It was not stepping forward or turning around. It seemed to shift slightly from side to side, like heat rising from pavement on a hot day, except it was nighttime and cold. The outline of the figure blurred and sharpened again, as if it was made from mist, smoke, or light reflecting off water. But there was no water there. There was just grass. And that small, pale shape. I remember holding my breath without realizing it. Every normal explanation rushed through my mind at once. Maybe it was a child wearing a white hoodie. Maybe it was a plastic bag caught in a bush. Maybe it was the moonlight hitting something in the grass. Maybe it was a reflection from one of the distant streetlights. But none of those things fit. It had the shape of a child. It stayed upright, and it moved. Not much, but enough that I knew I was not looking at an object. The movement was slow and strange. The shape seemed to bend and sway, but not in the way someone sways when they are standing in the cold. It was more like the figure was not completely attached to the ground, like it was drifting in place. I looked back at my friend. He was still staring at it. I pointed toward the pale figure and said, "Is it right there?" The second I said that, he looked at me. I will never forget the expression on his face. It was not the look of someone who thought I was joking. It was not the look of someone who had seen a person standing in the park and was wondering what they were doing. He looked terrified. His eyes were wide, and all the color had drained from his face. For a second, he did not say anything. He just looked at me as if I had confirmed something he desperately did not want to be true. Then he nodded, very slightly. That was enough. I do not remember who stood up first. I do not remember whether anyone shouted. I only remember that we ran. We did not stay to get a better look. We did not call out to the figure. We did not walk closer. We did not try to use our phone flashlights to see what it was. Every instinct in us seemed to agree that getting away from there was the only thing we needed to do. We ran straight back toward the car. The path we had walked down only minutes earlier suddenly seemed much longer. The park lights flashed past us as we ran, and the dark spaces between them felt like they were filled with something. I remember my shoes slipping slightly on the grass. I remember hearing my own breathing too loudly. I remember not wanting to look behind me. That was the hardest part. I wanted to know if the thing was following us, but I was too scared to turn around. It felt like if I looked back and saw it closer, I would not be able to keep moving. So I kept my eyes forward and ran as fast as I could. My friends were beside me or behind me, and I could hear them moving, but nobody spoke. We reached the car quickly, though it did not feel quick at all. One of us fumbled with the keys. I remember standing near the passenger door, looking around the parking lot while waiting for the lock to click open. The school was still dark. The road was still quiet. The park was behind us, just beyond the edge of the parking area. I kept expecting to see that pale shape standing at the end of the path. I kept expecting to see it moving toward us, but I did not look long enough to find out. As soon as the doors unlocked, we got inside. The car doors shut hard. For a moment, nobody started the engine. We just sat there. The inside of the car felt safer, even though it was only glass and metal. It was warm compared to the cold outside, and the overhead light came on briefly when the doors closed. That small light made everything feel more normal for a second. Then, it went out, and we were sitting in darkness again. I looked over at my friend. He was still pale. He was breathing hard, but not from running alone. He looked like he had seen something that had shaken him deeply. I asked him what he saw. At first, he did not answer. He was looking through the windshield, not toward the park directly, but in that general direction. His hands were clenched in his lap. Finally, he described it. He said he had seen a small white figure near the trees. He said it looked like a child. He said it did not move like a person. He said it looked almost like it was waving or bending, but without walking. Then I told him what I had seen. I tried not to add too much. I wanted to see whether our descriptions really matched. I said it looked small. I said it was pale. I said it had the shape of a child. I said it was moving strangely, like it was made from light or smoke. He looked at me and said that was exactly what he saw. That was the moment I really started feeling sick. If I had been alone, I could have told myself it was my imagination. I could have blamed the darkness, the strange feeling in the park, or the fact that my friend had already said he thought he saw something. Maybe his comment made me look harder than I normally would have, and maybe I turned a shadow into a figure, but he described the same thing, the same shape, the same color, the same strange movement, and he had seen it before I pointed it out. Nobody wanted to go back. We drove away from the park and did not say much for the rest of the night. The streets around the school looked normal as we left. Houses had lights on, cars passed occasionally. We saw people at a petrol station farther down the road. Everything outside the park was ordinary. That made what happened feel even stranger. It was not like we had gone somewhere far away or abandoned. The park was right next to the school. We had spent countless nights there before. It had always been a normal place. But something about that night felt wrong from the second we arrived. The silence, the darkness, the way my friend started staring off before I saw anything, the pale shape standing far ahead of us, the fact that we both saw it. After that, we never went back to that park at night. We still went near the school during the day. We still passed the park. We still saw kids using the paths and people walking their dogs. In daylight, it looked completely normal. The grass was just grass. The trees were just trees. The place where we had seen the figure was nothing more than an open patch of ground near the edge of the park. But at night, I could not bring myself to go back. My friend felt the same way. We talked about it a few times afterward, but never for very long. Neither of us had a good explanation. We did not tell many people because we knew how it would sound. Two teenagers sitting in a dark park, already feeling creeped out, seeing a ghost-like figure in the distance. It was easy to imagine people laughing and telling us we had scared ourselves. Maybe we had. Maybe there was a child in a white coat walking near the trees. Maybe distant light and darkness made them look strange. Maybe the movement was only an illusion caused by branches and shadows. Maybe we both saw the same normal thing and interpreted it as something else because the mood was already wrong. I still think about that possibility. I want there to be a simple answer. But even now, I remember that silhouette too clearly. I remember the way it did not look solid. I remember it moving without really walking. I remember how it looked like it was made of pale light against the dark grass. And I remember my friend's face when I asked, "Is it right there?" He did not have to explain anything. The look on him told me he saw it too. To this day, I do not know what that figure was, why the park felt so wrong that night, or why both of us saw the same thing in the same place. I only know that after spending so many ordinary nights at that park, one night changed the way we saw it forever. We never went back there after dark again. When I was a teenager, I lived with my parents in the rural countryside in the UK. It was one of those small villages where nearly everyone knew each other, and most people had lived there for decades. There were only a few streets, a small shop, a pub, a church, and not much else. The sort of place where people noticed when a car they did not recognize drove through, and where news traveled faster than it should have. During the day, it was peaceful in the way countryside villages usually are. There were fields around the edges of the houses, narrow roads with hedges growing over them, and long stretches where you could walk without seeing another person. The village itself was mostly made up of older residents, retired couples, widows, grandparents, and people who had settled there after spending their working lives somewhere else. There were not many young families, and there definitely were not many teenagers. Because of that, there was very little for someone my age to do. There was one small children's park near the edge of the village. It was not much. It had a rusty slide, a small climbing frame, a set of swings, and a patch of grass where someone had installed a basketball hoop years ago. There was no proper court, no concrete surface, no painted lines, and no fence around it. Just a hoop on a rough bit of grass that turned muddy whenever it rained. Most of the time, nobody used it. The park looked like it had been forgotten by everyone except the council workers who occasionally came by to cut the grass. The swings were faded and squeaked when they moved. The metal parts had spots of rust. The slide was scratched and dull from years of rain and sun. The climbing frame had weeds growing around the bottom of it. In summer, the grass grew too long near the edges. In winter, the whole place became muddy and miserable. There were no children in the village to use it. At least, not many. And there was another reason people avoided it. Right beside the park was an old slaughterhouse. I still do not understand why the council had ever allowed a children's park to be built next to something like that. Maybe the slaughterhouse had been operating when the park was first built. Maybe nobody cared at the time. Maybe the village was different years ago, with more families and more children. Whatever the reason, it was a strange setup. The slaughterhouse had been abandoned for as long as I could remember. It was a large, ugly building made of old brick. and metal, with broken windows and sections of wall covered in weeds. The roof sagged in places. Some of the windows had been boarded up, while others were smashed or cracked. The main gates were usually shut, but the place never looked secure. It always felt like someone could be inside if they wanted to be. During the day, it was creepy enough. At night, it looked worse. There were no lights around it. No security lamps, no working signs, nothing. The building became a dark shape against the sky, with broken windows that looked like empty black holes. When the wind moved through the surrounding trees and weeds, it sometimes made the old metal sections creak or rattle. Nobody ever said much about it. It was just there. Part of the village. Part of the background. But everyone knew it was not somewhere you were meant to go near after dark. Even with the slaughterhouse next door, the park would have been almost completely unused if it had not been for one little girl I used to see there sometimes. She could not have been more than 10 or 12 years old. I never knew her name. I never spoke to her. I did not even know where she lived. But every once in a while, I would pass the park during the afternoon or early evening and see her sitting on one of the swings by herself. She was always alone. That was what first made me notice her. In a small village, you expect to see children with parents, grandparents, siblings, or friends. You expect somebody nearby keeping an eye on them. But this girl would be there by herself, swinging slowly, sometimes for what seemed like a long time. At first I did not think much about it. Maybe her house was nearby. Maybe her parents knew where she was. Maybe she was old enough to be trusted on her own for a little while. But then I started noticing that I never saw anyone come with her or leave with her. I never saw a parent standing nearby. I never saw her walking in from one of the roads. I never saw her talking to anyone else. I would just look over and she would already be there, usually on the swing closest to the edge of the park, the one facing away from the basketball hoop and toward the old slaughterhouse. Sometimes she would be swinging normally, her feet pushing lightly off the ground. Other times she would barely be moving at all, just sitting there with the swing slowly swaying back and forth. I remember thinking she looked lonely. Not scary, not at first, just lonely. Still, there was something about seeing a child alone in that park that always made me uncomfortable. It was too quiet there. The village itself was quiet enough, but the park had its own kind of silence. It sat slightly away from the houses, close to the derelict building, and the trees around it blocked a lot of the sound from the road. Even in the afternoon, it felt isolated. I told myself I was overthinking it. I was a teenager. Teenagers get bored and make strange places seem more dramatic than they are. The abandoned slaughterhouse probably made the park feel creepier than it really was. The little girl was probably just a local child who liked swinging on her own. That was what I thought. Until one night when my friend and I decided to go there. We had both been bored at home, and there was nothing happening in the village. We did not have cars yet, and neither of us wanted to sit around in our bedrooms all night. So we met up and walked over to the park with a basketball. The basketball hoop there was not great, but it was something to do. We could shoot around, make fun of each other when we missed, and waste a couple of hours without anyone bothering us. And honestly, we could smoke cigarettes away from our parents. That was a big part of it. The park was far enough from the houses that we could stand near the edge, smoke, and nobody would see us unless they came looking. It was stupid teenager behavior, but at the time it felt like freedom. We had nowhere else to go and no plans beyond passing the evening. When we got there, it was still light enough to see properly. The grass was uneven beneath our shoes, and the basketball bounced badly because of the ground. Every now and then it would hit a patch of dirt or a raised section of grass and roll off in a strange direction. We spent more time chasing it than actually playing. Still, we stayed there. We talked about random things, school, people we knew, rumors around the village, music, plans that probably would never happen. The kind of conversation teenagers have when there is nothing urgent to say, but you do not want the night to end. As it got darker, the park changed. The first problem was that there were no lights. Not one street lamp covered that part of the village. The road nearby had a few lights farther away, but they did not reach the park. Once the sun went down, the playground equipment became shadows. The slide turned into a dark shape. The climbing frame disappeared into the grass. The swings became two thin black lines hanging from a frame you could barely see. The slaughterhouse became almost invisible. That somehow made it worse. When you could not see it properly, your mind filled in the gaps. You knew it was there beside the park, but you could only make out the darkest outline of the roof and windows behind the trees. Every now and then, moonlight would catch part of the brick wall or a broken window, and then it would vanish again. By that point, we were using the torches on our phones to find the basketball whenever it rolled too far away. The screens and phone lights did not help much. They only showed a small circle of grass directly in front of you. Everything beyond that circle stayed black. When we walked away from each other to retrieve the ball, it became easy to lose sight of the other person, even though they were only a few meters away. It must have been around 11 at night when we finally decided to leave. We had stayed longer than we should have. The basketball had become pointless in the dark. We were cold, tired, and probably both worried about getting caught out late by our parents. The park felt different now, almost hostile in the dark. It was no longer a place to hang out. It was just an empty patch of grass beside an abandoned slaughterhouse. As we stood near the basketball hoop, gathering our things, I remembered the little girl. I do not know why I mentioned her then. Maybe because I wanted to scare my friend a little. Maybe because the park felt creepy already, and I wanted to make a joke out of it. Maybe because I had seen her there enough times that the thought of her had become connected to that place in my mind. I told him about the girl I had seen on the swings. I explained that she was always alone. I said I had never seen an adult with her. I said she was usually on the swing closest to the slaughterhouse. I made it sound more dramatic than I probably needed to, because that is what teenagers do when they want to unsettle each other. My friend laughed at first. He told me I was trying too hard to make the place scary. I said I was serious. Then I suggested we walk over to the swings and see whether anything happened. I expected him to tell me no. Instead, he looked toward the dark outline of the swing set and said something like, "Fine, you go first." We started walking across the grass. The swings were not far away, maybe 30 or 40 meters from where we had been standing, but at night it felt much farther. We used our phone torches to light the ground in front of us. The grass was wet in places, and we had to watch where we stepped. The basketball was tucked under my arm, and my friend kept glancing toward the slaughterhouse. I remember laughing nervously. I was trying to keep the mood light. I said something about how maybe the little girl would ask us to play basketball. My friend did not laugh. The closer we got to the swings, the quieter we became. At first, I thought it was because we were both waiting for something to happen. We had talked ourselves into being scared. That was all. Two teenagers walking through a dark, empty park beside an abandoned slaughterhouse, using phone lights and telling ghost stories. Then we saw movement. It was very slight at first, just one of the swings moving. I stopped walking. My friend stopped too. Neither of us said anything. The swing was going up and down, not wildly, not high enough to make a loud squeaking sound. It was moving slowly, steadily, the way a person swings when they are not trying to go high. Forward, back, forward, back. At first, I thought the wind might be pushing it, but there was barely any wind. The trees were still, the grass was not moving, and the swing was not empty. There was someone on it. We could not see the person clearly. The darkness hid everything above the legs. The swing set was partly in shadow, and our phone torches did not reach far enough without us moving closer. But every time the swing moved forward, a small part of the figure passed through the moonlight. A pair of shoes. Small shoes. They came forward into the pale moonlight, then disappeared backward into shadow. Forward, back, forward, back. The shape of the shoes was exactly the size you would expect on a child. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. My brain tried to explain it. Maybe it was another kid from the village. Maybe somebody had come to the park while we were playing, and we had not noticed. Maybe the girl I had mentioned really was there, and I had somehow made the whole thing feel worse by talking about her. But why would a child be sitting alone on a swing at 11 at night? Why would there be no sound? Why had we not seen anyone walk into the park? Why was she sitting on the swing nearest the old slaughterhouse? I could feel my stomach drop. My friend looked at me. I could not see his face clearly, but I could tell from the way he stood that he was scared. The swing kept moving. The shoes moved in and out of the moonlight. Up, down, no squeaking, no talking, no laughter, no sound except the faint scrape of the chains moving. I remember thinking that if it was really the little girl, then we should say something. We should ask if she was okay. We should ask where her parents were. That would be the normal thing to do. But neither of us spoke. We did not call out. We did not take another step closer. We did not shine our phone lights directly at her. Something about it felt wrong. Not just strange. Wrong. The figure on the swing did not look toward us. At least, not that I could see. Her face stayed hidden in shadow. The only thing visible was the movement of those shoes. The little flashes of pale moonlight catching them each time the swing moved forward. My friend whispered, "Let's go." I did not need to be told twice. We turned around immediately. We did not run at first, but we walked away quickly. We did not take the shortest path home either. The quick route would have taken us past the edge of the park and closer to the slaughterhouse. Neither of us wanted to go that way. Instead, we walked the long way around. It meant taking the road that curved past a few houses and then doubled back toward where we lived. It took longer, but there were streetlights on that route. There were houses. There were gardens, parked cars, curtains, and normal signs of people living their lives. I remember how quiet we were. Neither of us said anything. Not because we had agreed not to. We just could not seem to speak. The only sounds were our footsteps on the road, the occasional car somewhere far off, and the wind starting to move through the hedges. I held the basketball tightly under my arm, though I do not remember picking it up again after we stopped. My phone was still in my hand with the torch turned on, even though we were back on a lit road. Every time we passed a dark driveway or gap between houses, I expected to see something moving. Every time I heard a sound behind us, I wanted to turn around. But I did not. I did not want to look back toward the park. I did not want to see whether the swing was still moving. I did not want to know if the little girl had followed us. We walked the entire way home in silence. By the time we reached the area near my house, the normal lights and familiar streets should have made us feel better, but they did not. The fear had settled into both of us. It was no longer the sudden jump of seeing something strange. It was a cold, heavy feeling that stayed in the background. When we finally stopped near my house, I looked at my friend properly. He was pale, not just a little nervous. He looked genuinely shaken. I think I asked him if he had seen what I saw. He nodded. That was all. For a while, neither of us wanted to describe it in detail. Maybe we were afraid that saying it out loud would make it more real. Maybe we were both worried that one of us had imagined it, and the other would laugh. But eventually, we did talk about it. He said he had seen the swing moving. He said he saw the shoes. He said he could tell they belonged to a child. He had not seen the girl's face either. That detail bothered me most. Neither of us could say what she looked like. Neither of us could describe her clothes, her hair, or her expression. We only saw the movement of the swing and those small shoes appearing in the moonlight. Over the years, I have tried to come up with a normal explanation. Maybe there really was a child at the park. Maybe she lived nearby and had snuck out. Maybe we had scared ourselves so badly with the story that we turned an empty swing into something more frightening than it was. Maybe the shoes were not shoes at all. Maybe they were part of the swing set, or a reflection, or something moving in the grass. But my friend saw it too. He still talks about it whenever I see him. Not constantly, not like he is obsessed with it, but every once in a while, when the subject of strange experiences comes up, he will bring it up and say it was one of the creepiest moments of his life. And I know exactly what he means, because I still remember that park. I remember the long grass, the broken basketball hoop, and the dark shape of the old slaughterhouse beside it. I remember the feeling of standing there with only phone torches, knowing that there were no streetlights around us. I remember trying to scare my friend with a story about a little girl who used the swings alone. Then I remember seeing the swing already moving. I remember the small silhouette of shoes rising into the moonlight and disappearing again. Forward, back, and I remember how both of us turned around without saying another word. To this day, I do not know whether it was really the same girl I had seen before. Maybe she was a real child who used the park during the day. Maybe we only thought we saw her at night because I had just told my friend about her. Or maybe there was something else sitting on that swing, hidden in the darkness, waiting for us to get closer. I do know one thing. After that night, I never went back to that park after dark again. In 2013, my ex and I had an experience that I still think about sometimes, even though I have tried for years to explain it in a normal way. I do not expect everyone to believe it. Honestly, I know how it sounds when I say it out loud. If someone else had told me the exact same story before it happened to me, I probably would have assumed they had seen a large dog, made a mistake in the moment, or let their imagination fill in details that were not really there. But both of us saw it. We did not discuss it beforehand. We did not build the story together. We pulled into the parking lot, looked in the same direction, and reacted at almost the exact same time. It was not dark. It was not late at night. We were not in the middle of the woods, on some empty road, or in an old abandoned place where you might expect your mind to start playing tricks on you. It was 9 in the morning. It was outside a post office. There were other cars nearby. And sitting in the passenger seat of a Jeep was something I can only describe, after years of trying to look up anything similar, as a hellhound. At the time, I did not know that word. I did not have a name for what I had seen. I only knew that it was not a normal dog, not a person, and not anything I could make sense of. The day had started normally. My ex and I had errands to run, and the post office was one of the first places we needed to stop. It was not an important morning. Nothing had felt strange before we pulled into the lot. We had probably been talking in the car, maybe about whatever we needed to mail, or where we were going after that. I do not remember the conversation, because, after what happened, every small detail from before we parked felt unimportant. What I do remember is the parking lot. The post office had the usual row of spaces in front of the building. It was a normal setup, with cars parked facing the building and another row positioned differently across from them. There was a Jeep already parked in front of us, in the row of spaces that ran perpendicular to where we stopped. We pulled into our space slowly, as people do when they are trying to park straight and avoid getting too close to another vehicle. The Jeep's passenger side ended up almost directly in front of us. At first, I did not think anything of it. It was just another vehicle in a parking lot. I may have noticed the Jeep simply because it was close enough to be in front of us as we came to a stop. Then, as the car settled into the space, I looked toward the passenger window. That was when I saw it. It was sitting in the passenger seat. For a fraction of a second, my brain tried to understand it as a dog. That was the closest thing it resembled. It had a dog-like shape, thick shaggy fur, and the general outline of some kind of canine. But the longer I looked at it, the more impossible it became to call it a dog. It was huge. Not large like a German Shepherd, a Great Dane, or a big mixed-breed dog. It looked too tall and too broad for that. Its body had the size and presence of a large man sitting upright in the passenger seat. It filled the space in a way no normal dog should have been able to fill it. The shoulders seemed too high. The chest looked too large. Its posture was too upright and too still. It was not leaning against the window like a dog waiting for its owner. It was not sitting in the seat the way a normal animal would. It looked as if it belonged there, like it was seated. Watching, the fur was dark and shaggy, though I cannot say exactly what color, because the memory has always been more about the shape and the eyes than the details of the coat. It looked thick and rough, not soft or clean like a pet that had been brushed. Its head was dog-like, but wrong in a way I still struggle to describe. It was not a wolf. It was not a bear. It was not a dog I recognized. The face had the shape of something canine, but the expression was too aware, too deliberate, too human. Then I saw its eyes. They were yellow. Not yellow in the way a dog's eyes can reflect headlights at night. This was the middle of the morning. There was daylight. The sun was up. There were no headlights shining into the Jeep. There was no dark road, no flash of light, and no reason for an animal's eyes to appear bright in that way. Its eyes were yellow and fixed directly on us. They did not look like animal eyes. They looked human. That is the part I cannot get past. A normal dog might look toward a passing car. It might glance at you, bark, wag its tail, or turn away. But this creature was staring. Not casually, not with curiosity. It was looking at us in a way that made me feel like it understood exactly what we were. It saw us, and it knew that we saw it. The moment we pulled into the space, both my ex and I gasped out loud. It was not the kind of small, surprised sound you make when someone cuts you off in traffic, or when you nearly miss a parking spot. It was a real reaction, a sharp intake of breath, the kind that happens before you have time to decide how you feel. I turned toward my ex. He was already staring at the Jeep. His face had gone pale. For a second, neither of us spoke. We just sat there in the car, looking at this thing through the passenger side window of the Jeep. The creature did not move. It did not bark. It did not turn away. It remained completely still, watching us. I remember feeling afraid, but I also remember feeling confused in a way that pushed through the fear. My mind was searching desperately for an explanation. Maybe it was a very large dog. Maybe the glass was distorting its body. Maybe someone had left an animal in the Jeep and it was sitting strangely. Maybe it was some kind of unusual breed I had never seen before. Maybe the height of the seat made it look more upright than it really was. But none of those thoughts stayed convincing for long. The creature was simply too large. Its posture was too strange, and those eyes did not look right. My ex reacted first. He opened the car door and got out quickly. I do not remember him saying much. I think he may have said something under his breath, but the main thing I remember is how fast he moved. He did not want to keep looking at it. He did not want to stand near the Jeep. He just wanted to get inside the post office. He went straight toward the entrance. I stayed in the car for another moment. I do not know why I did not immediately follow him. Maybe it was shock. Maybe I was too confused to move. Or maybe curiosity took over. The creature scared me, but it also made me want to know what it was. I could not accept what I had seen without trying to find a rational explanation. I looked at it again. It was still there, still sitting in the passenger seat, still staring. Then I got out of the car. The second I broke eye contact, everything changed. It happened so quickly that I am still not completely sure how to describe it. I opened my car door and stepped out. For one brief moment, I looked down to make sure I did not hit the parked vehicle or step into something. When I looked back toward the Jeep, the creature was gone. Not moving away, not ducking down. Gone, the passenger seat was empty. I stood there beside my car, completely frozen. At first, I assumed it had dropped down onto the floor of the Jeep. That seemed like the most reasonable explanation, even though it would have been difficult for something that size to hide that quickly. Maybe it had seen me move and lowered itself out of view. Maybe it had been sitting on the floor the whole time, and I had somehow misunderstood its shape. But I had not imagined the height of it. I had seen its upper body in the window. I had seen its head. I had seen its eyes. It had been sitting high enough in the passenger seat that there was no way it could have simply disappeared below the line of the dashboard without me seeing movement. Still, I needed to check. I walked toward the Jeep. My heart was beating hard, but I was trying to stay calm. I told myself I was going to find a simple answer. Maybe it was a dog lying in the footwell. Maybe the owner had come back while I was getting out and moved it. Maybe the windows were tinted in a way that had made my eyes misread what I saw. When I got close enough to look inside, the passenger seat was empty. Completely empty. There was no large dog curled up on the seat. There was no blanket piled there. There was no person hiding low against the floor. There was no cage, no carrier, no open bag, nothing. I circled the Jeep. I looked through the passenger side window again. Then the front windshield. Then the driver's side. Then the back windows. All of the windows were closed. The doors were closed too. There was no open door. No open window. No way for something the size of what I had seen to get out in the few seconds between me stepping out of my car and walking toward the Jeep. I looked under the vehicle. Nothing. I looked around the parking lot. Nothing. No animal running between cars. No huge black shape moving away. No person near the Jeep. No owner standing nearby calling for a dog. No one acting as though anything strange had happened. The Jeep was just sitting there. Normal. Empty. It looked like a regular parked vehicle in front of a post office at 9 in the morning. But I knew what had been sitting in that passenger seat. At least, I knew what I thought I had seen. I stood there for a while, walking around the Jeep and trying to make sense of it. I checked every window again. I tried to see if there was some hidden space or an angle I had missed. I checked the rear seat. I checked the floor area. I looked through the windshield at the dashboard and front passenger footwell. Nothing. There was nowhere for it to hide. That was what unsettled me the most. If it had been a large dog, it could not have disappeared that quickly. If it had been a person, they could not have gotten out without opening a door. If it had been some kind of reflection, I could not understand what it had been a reflection of, because there was nothing near us that matched the shape I saw. The Jeep was empty. My ex was already inside the post office. I remember looking toward the building and seeing him through the front windows. He was moving quickly, like he wanted to get away from the parking lot as soon as possible. He did not stop to see what I was doing. He did not come back out to investigate. He had seen enough. Eventually, I followed him inside. The post office was bright, ordinary, and full of all the normal sounds that suddenly felt comforting. People stood in line. Someone was talking to a clerk. Mail bins were stacked behind the counter. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. Everything was exactly as it should have been. But my ex looked shaken. He did not want to talk about it. I asked him if he had seen what I saw, and he barely wanted to answer. I remember him saying something close to yes, but he did not want to describe it. He did not want to stand there and compare details. He did not want to give it more attention than it already had. It was obvious that whatever he saw had frightened him badly. That reaction mattered to me. I have always wondered if I would have questioned my own memory more if I had been alone. Maybe I would have convinced myself that I saw a dog in a strange position. Maybe I would have blamed reflections on the glass, lack of sleep, stress, or an overactive imagination. But he reacted before I could say anything, before I could ask whether he saw it, before I could put any idea into his head. He saw something in that passenger seat, and whatever it was scared him enough that he ran inside without waiting for me. That made it harder to dismiss. After we finished at the post office, I looked for the Jeep again. I do not know whether it was still there or whether it had left by then. Part of me did not want to see it again. Another part wanted to inspect it more closely. Maybe wait for the owner to return and ask if they had a dog. But I also knew how strange that would sound. What was I supposed to ask? Excuse me, did you have a huge shaggy creature with human-looking yellow eyes sitting in your passenger seat? There was no way to ask that without sounding unhinged. And honestly, I was afraid of what the answer might be. If the owner said they had a dog, I would have some kind of explanation, even if it still did not fully fit what I saw. But if they said there was no animal in the Jeep, then what? I did not want to know. So I left it alone. For a long time afterward, I kept thinking about that morning. I replayed the scene over and over. The way we pulled into the parking space, the Jeep sitting directly in front of us, the creature in the passenger seat, the yellow eyes, the way it looked straight at us, the way my ex and I both gasped at the same time. Then the moment I got out, the moment I looked away, the empty seat. I searched online later, trying to find anything that matched what I had seen. That was when I came across the word hellhound. I had heard the word before in movies or stories, but I had never connected it to anything real. The descriptions were not perfect, because I do not know if any description could perfectly match something so strange, but it was the closest term I found. Huge dog-like creature, dark or black fur, unnatural eyes, a sense of intelligence or awareness beyond an ordinary animal. That was as close as I could get. I do not know if that is what it was. I do not know if it was anything supernatural. Maybe it was an unusual dog that I saw from the wrong angle. Maybe the Jeep's tinted glass made its eyes look yellow. Maybe a large person in dark clothing was sitting in the passenger seat and my brain turned them into something else. Maybe it was a reflection combined with a shadow, and because my ex and I both startled each other, we became convinced that we had seen the same thing. I have tried to make all of those explanations work, but the more I think about the details, the less satisfied I am. The thing was too big. It was too upright. It looked too much like a dog and too much like a person at the same time. Its eyes were too clear, and it vanished too fast. I still get chills when I remember the way it stared at us. Not because it attacked us or made any sound, but because it did not react like an animal caught in a car. It did not look frightened. It did not look trapped. It did not look confused. It just watched us. Then, during one brief break in eye contact, it was gone. My ex never wanted to talk about it afterward. That was almost as unsettling as the event itself. He was not someone who usually scared easily. But after that morning, he avoided the subject. He would not sit down and compare what we saw. He would not answer detailed questions. He did not want to talk about the creature, the jeep, the post office, or the eyes. Maybe that was his way of coping with it. Maybe he wanted to forget it before it became too real. I understand that now. There are some things that feel safer when you leave them unexplained. But I still think about it. I think about a normal morning in 2013, a normal post office parking lot, and a Jeep parked directly in front of us. I think about the passenger window and the huge dark shape sitting behind it. I think about the shaggy fur, the impossible stature, and those yellow eyes that looked far too human. And I think about how when I finally got the courage to walk over and see what it was, there was nothing there at all. Tonight's stories are over, but darkness has a way of making memories feel closer. Some people never forgot what they saw. Others never learned what was behind the sound, the voice, or the shape waiting just outside the light. Tell me in the comments which story you will be thinking about after this ends. Subscribe to Wickless Night for more true accounts from the hours when no one wants to be awake alone. Sleep carefully, and do not trust every shadow that stays still.